He had everything, except what truly mattered. But it only took one phone call and the cries of 3 lives to dismantle the most guarded man you can imagine. If you like stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post daily. Continuing. The helicopter sliced through the blue sky of Key West, Florida, like a silver blade, leaving behind the crystal-clear waters of the Florida coast. Raphael Montgomery gazed out the window at the unfolding landscape below. But his dark eyes didn't register the tropical beauty that enchanted millions of tourists every year. To him, it was just numbers, square feet of land, occupancy potential, projected profit. At 35, Raphael had transformed Montgomery Holdings into one of the country's largest real estate conglomerates, and his reputation as a ruthless businessman preceded his arrival anywhere. The pilot announced they were approaching their destination. Raphael adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt and checked his Rolex. Punctuality was a religion for him, as was absolute control over every detail of his ventures. He had bought that bankrupt resort for a fraction of its market value, and now planned to transform it into the most exclusive luxury complex in the southeastern United States. Nothing could go wrong. He wouldn't allow it. The helicopter landed on the resort's private beach, kicking up a cloud of sand that made the waiting staff shield their eyes. Raphael disembarked with the erect posture he had cultivated since adolescence, when he learned that showing vulnerability was synonymous with weakness. His dark suit contrasted with the beach environment, but he didn't care. He was there for work, not for vacation. Mark, the project's general manager, approached with a nervous smile. "Mr. Montgomery, welcome. We have everything prepared for the meeting with the design team. Ms. Albright has already arrived and is reviewing the spaces." "Perfect," Raphael replied in the deep voice that intimidated even his most experienced executives. "I want to see every inch of this place, and I want detailed reports on all delays." As they walked through the lobby under construction, Raphael made mental notes of everything he saw: misplaced pillars, low-quality finishes, delayed schedule. His jaw tightened. He had hired the country's best interior design firm, but now he doubted if the recommendation had been sound. "Where is the project manager?" he asked, interrupting Mark's technical explanation about the ceiling structure. "She's in the infinity pool area, sir, taking some final measurements." Raphael headed towards the outdoor area, his Italian shoes echoing on the still unvarnished wooden floor. The early afternoon sun beat down intensely, but he didn't loosen his tie. Comfort was a luxury he didn't allow himself. That's when he saw her. Louisa Albright was kneeling on the floor, a clipboard resting on her knee, sketching something with quick, precise movements. She wore a simple white blouse, jeans, and sneakers, her light brown hair tied in a relaxed ponytail. There was nothing glamorous about her appearance, but there was something more, a pure energy, an absolute concentration that made her seem oblivious to everything around her. "Miss Albright," Raphael called, maintaining the authoritative tone he used with all suppliers. Louisa looked up, and for an instant, Raphael felt something strange. Her eyes were an intense green, almost emerald, and carried an intensity he didn't expect to find. She rose slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans before extending them to greet him. "Mr. Montgomery, I presume." "Louisa Albright," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was expecting your arrival. I hope you have a good explanation for the scheduled delays." Raphael went straight to the point, ignoring her extended hand. Louisa lowered her hand without showing embarrassment and raised an eyebrow. "Delays? Interesting. In fact, we are 2 days ahead of the original schedule." "That's impossible. I received reports based on a schedule that didn't account for the region's climatic specificities or the availability of local materials," Louisa interrupted him, consulting her clipboard. "I revised the entire project when I took over, and we implemented more efficient and sustainable solutions. If you wish, I can show you the numbers." Raphael was silent for a moment. No one interrupted him. No one questioned his reports, and certainly no one spoke to him that way as if he were just another client. "Show me," he said, trying to maintain control. Louisa led him through the resort, explaining every modification she had made to the original design. She spoke passionately about sustainability, about valuing local culture, about creating spaces that respected the natural beauty of the place instead of trying to dominate it. Raphael followed her in silence, observing not only the physical changes but the way she moved through the space, how she touched surfaces, how her eyes sparkled when she talked about a specific detail. "Here," she said, stopping in front of what would be the main restaurant, "I suggested replacing these glass walls with a semi-open structure. The original design would create a claustrophobic environment and drastically increase air conditioning costs." Raphael examined the drawings she showed him. The modification was intelligent, functional, and economically advantageous. He hated having to admit it. "And who authorized these changes?" he asked, trying to regain control of the situation. "No one," Louisa replied without hesitation. "I took responsibility. After all, what is a designer for, if not to improve the project?" "To follow instructions," Raphael retorted, feeling his irritation grow. "This is not an experimental project. It's a $50 million investment." "Exactly," she said, turning to face him directly. "And that's precisely why it deserves to be done the right way, not the fast way." The two stared at each other in silence, and Raphael felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Someone was challenging his authority and showing no intimidation whatsoever. It was unsettling, it was intriguing. "Show me the rest," he finally said. The tour continued for another 2 hours. Louisa presented each environment with impressive technical knowledge, but always tempered with an artistic sensibility that transformed simple spaces into experiences. She had researched the region's history, incorporated elements of local culture, created environments that were luxurious without being ostentatious. Raphael found himself paying attention not only to what she said, but to how she said it. There was music in her voice, an authenticity that contrasted sharply with the corporate world he was accustomed to. When she smiled, which happened frequently while talking about her work, her entire face transformed. "And this is the Master Suites area," Louisa said, leading him to the top floor of one of the towers. Each has an ocean view and private beach access. They were on the terrace of one of the suites, and the sunset was beginning to paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. The sea breeze brought the scent of salt and the sound of waves. Raphael approached the balustrade, observing the view. "It's impressive," he said, almost without thinking. Louisa watched him with curiosity. For a moment, his authoritative mask had fallen, and she saw something different. Vulnerability, perhaps, or just fatigue. "What brought you into this business?" she asked, surprising him with the change of subject. "Business is business," Raphael replied automatically, regaining his composure. "That's not an answer," Louisa insisted. "I mean, why build? Why create spaces?" Raphael stared at her, disconcerted by the question. No one had ever asked him that. He hadn't even reflected on it himself in years. "Because it's profitable," he said, but the answer sounded hollow even to him. "It must be lonely," Louisa murmured, looking back at the sea. "What?" "Seeing the world only in numbers. It must be very lonely." Raphael felt something twist in his chest. Anger, perhaps, or recognition. "You don't know me," he said, his voice lower than he intended. "No," she agreed, "but I know the type. I've worked for several men like you, always in control, always afraid to show anything that might be interpreted as weakness." "I'm not afraid of anything." Louisa turned to him, and this time her smile was gentle, almost sad. "Everyone is afraid of something, Mr. Montgomery. The difference is that some admit it, and others build walls." She moved away from the balustrade and picked up her clipboard. "Tomorrow I can show you the details of the bathrooms and the gourmet kitchen, unless you prefer another team member to do it." It was a chance to get rid of her, to return to the safe territory of reports and numbers, but Raphael heard himself saying, "No, you can continue." Louisa nodded and headed for the exit. "Good night, Mr. Montgomery." "Raphael," he said impulsively. "You can call me Raphael." She stopped at the door and turned to him, a genuine smile lighting her face. "Good night, Raphael." After she left, Raphael stood alone on the terrace, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. For the first time in years, he didn't think about schedules, spreadsheets, or meetings. He thought about green eyes and how someone could challenge his certainties with just a few words. Louisa descended the resort stairs with a racing heart. There was something about that man that intrigued her. Beneath all that corporate armor, she had glimpsed something different. Pain, perhaps, or loneliness. She knew both feelings well. At 28, Louisa had built her career from scratch. The daughter of a bricklayer and a seamstress, she had grown up in Gainesville, Florida, watching her father work on constructions he could never inhabit. From a young age, she drew imaginary houses, spaces where people could be happy. She earned a scholarship to study architecture at Florida State University, FSU, and later specialized in interior design. Now she ran her own company in Miami, but she still remembered every sacrifice that had brought her there. Raphael Montgomery represented everything she normally despised: privilege, arrogance, power used without responsibility. But there was something more in him, something she had recognized the moment their eyes met. He was a wounded man trying to hide behind successes and achievements. She arrived at the small hotel where she was staying and went up to her. Simple room. From the window she could see the resort lights coming on in the darkness. Tomorrow would be another day of work, more meetings, more technical decisions. But she couldn't get his expression out of her mind when she had commented on loneliness. Raphael, for his part, remained on the terrace until very late. He called his secretary in New York City and cancelled 2 meetings for the following week. For the first time in years, he felt the need to be personally present at a project. Not because of the numbers or the schedule, because of a green-eyed woman who had looked beyond his defenses and seen something he himself had forgotten existed. When he finally went down to his room, Raphael knew that this trip would be different from all the others. He didn't know yet what that meant, but for the first time in a long time he was curious to find out. The next 3 days unfolded in a strange dance between Raphael and Louisa. He had decided to personally accompany every stage of the project, something he had never done before, and she showed neither satisfaction nor annoyance with his constant presence. During the mornings, they walked together through the construction areas, she explaining technical details with a patience he didn't deserve, he asking questions less and less related to business and more driven by genuine curiosity. Raphael discovered that Louisa had grown up watching her father work as a bricklayer, that she had been drawing since childhood, that she had fought for every opportunity in a field dominated by wealthy and well-connected men. She, in turn, realized that behind the ruthless facade, Raphael was a deeply lonely man who had turned the need for control into an obsession and who, when he let his guard down for a few seconds, revealed a subtle humor and an intelligence that went far beyond numbers. "Why do you never smile during meetings?" Louisa asked one Wednesday morning as they reviewed the materials chosen for the lobby. Raphael was examining a sample of reclaimed wood she had suggested for a wall covering. The question caught him off guard. "Smiles are interpreted as agreement or weakness in business," he replied automatically. "And outside of business?" He looked up at her. "There's not much to smile about." "That's sad," Louisa said simply, and returned her attention to her notes. Raphael continued to watch her for a moment. Louisa wore a yellow blouse that day, a color that enhanced the golden tone of her skin. She had pinned her hair with a simple clip, but some stubborn strands escaped and framed her face. When she concentrated, she lightly bit her lower lip, a gesture that Raphael was beginning to find disturbingly attractive. "What makes you smile?" he heard himself ask. "Many things," she replied without looking up. "The smell of coffee in the morning, children playing on the beach, solving a design problem that seemed impossible. Seeing a space I created being used exactly as I imagined. And people." Now she looked at him and Raphael saw something different in her eyes, a softness that wasn't there in the first few days. "People can make me smile too," she said softly, "when they are genuine." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Mark, carrying a pile of documents and looking worried. "Mr. Montgomery, we need to talk about the weather forecast. The meteorological center has issued a tropical storm warning for the next 24 hours. The recommendation is for preventive evacuation. Raphael took the papers and examined the data. The storm would be strong but not devastating. Delaying the schedule as a precaution would cost precious days and a lot of money. We won't stop, he decided. We'll reduce the team to the essential and protect the materials. The structure can handle it. Raphael, Louisa called him, using his first name for the first time since the first day. Mark is right. It's not worth the risk. The risk is calculated, Raphael retorted, annoyed that his decision was questioned in front of an employee. We don't stop a $50 million project because of rain. It's not about money, Louisa insisted, standing up. It's about safety, of people. The decision is mine. Raphael ended the matter with the tone he used to close discussions in corporate boards. Louisa looked at him for a long moment, and he saw disappointment in her green eyes. She gathered her materials in silence. Of course, she said finally, it's your project. She left the room, leaving a heavy silence behind her. Mark cleared his throat nervously. Sir, the team could stay at the city hotel. Make preparations to protect the equipment, Raphael interrupted him, and ask Miss Albright to come to my office in an hour. When Louisa arrived at the temporary office Raphael had set up in one of the finished suites, she knocked on the door harder than necessary. He was on the phone, probably discussing strategies with someone in New York City. She waited standing, refusing to sit until he finished the call. You called for me, she asked when he hung up. Sit down. I prefer to stand. Raphael sighed and stood up, walking around the table to be closer to her. Louisa, I know you have opinions on how to conduct this project. They're not opinions, she interrupted him. They're matters of basic safety. You can't put people at risk because of a schedule. No one will get hurt. I'll take all necessary precautions. How can you be so sure? She asked, and there was something more in her voice than professional irritation. Raphael hesitated. There was something in the way she had asked the question, a vulnerability he didn't expect. Because I'm always sure, he said, but the answer sounded less convincing than he intended. My father almost died in a storm, Louisa said suddenly, the words coming out as if she fought against them. He was working on a construction site in Miami. The boss didn't want to stop because of the rain. A scaffolding collapsed. He was in the hospital for 3 days with a head injury. Raphael felt something twist in his chest. Louisa. He was never the same, she continued, the words coming out quickly now. He became afraid of heights, of storms, of working on anything that wasn't on the ground. A man who built skyscrapers started doing only walls and sidewalks. The silence that followed was charged with a different tension. Raphael found himself wanting to get closer to her, wanting somehow to fix a pain that had happened long before he knew her. Why didn't you tell me this before? He asked softly. Because you didn't ask, she replied. You just decided. Raphael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Louisa was beginning to recognize as a sign that he was struggling with something internally. The team can go to the city, he said finally, but I'm staying. Someone needs to supervise the equipment protection. I'm staying too, Louisa said immediately. No. It's not your decision, she retorted, using the same authoritative tone he had used with her. Half of the equipment that needs protection is my responsibility. They stared at each other once more, but this time there was something different in the air between them. A mutual understanding, a recognition that both were people accustomed to fighting for what they believed in. All right, Raphael conceded, but at the first sign of real danger, we leave. The storm arrived in the early hours of Thursday with a fury that exceeded all forecasts. The wind howled like a wounded animal, making the resort structures creak worryingly. The rain beat against the windows like thrown stones, and lightning illuminated the black sky at intervals that seemed to grow shorter and shorter. Raphael and Louisa had spent the night checking equipment fastenings and sealing exposed openings. Around 3 in the morning, a power outage plunged the entire complex into darkness. They were in the restaurant area when it happened, and Raphael turned on his phone's flashlight. We need to go somewhere safer, he shouted over the noise of the storm. Louisa nodded, gathering the material she could carry. They headed for the residential tower, which had the most solid structure in the complex. Raphael guided her up the dark stairs, until they reached the third floor, where one of the suites was partially finished and had smaller windows. Inside the apartment, the sound of the storm was less overwhelming, but still deafening. Raphael found some candles in the kitchen and lit them, creating a circle of warm light in the middle of the darkness. "Are you cold?" he asked, noticing Louisa trembling slightly. She shook her head, but he went to the bedroom and returned with a blanket he found in one of the closets. Without much thought, he approached and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, his hands briefly, touching her skin. The contact was quick, but both felt an electric spark that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. "Thank you," she murmured. They sat on the living room sofa, maintaining a respectful distance, but aware of each other's presence in a way that went beyond the professional. The candlelight danced on their faces, creating soft, intimate shadows. "Are you regretting staying?" Louisa asked after a moment. Raphael thought about the question. "No," he said, surprised by his own sincerity. "And you?" "Me neither." They were silent for a while, listening to the storm roar outside. There was something deeply intimate about being isolated that way, protected only by concrete walls and each other's presence. "Can I ask you something?" Louisa said, turning to face him. "Of course. Why are you like this?" "Like what?" "So controlled, so distant, as if you're afraid to let anyone get close." Raphael felt something twist inside him. It was the second time in a few days that someone saw him so clearly, and it was both terrifying and liberating. "Because letting people get close means giving them the power to leave," he said without thinking, the words coming out before he could censor them. Louisa said nothing for a moment, just watched him in the golden candlelight. "Who left?" she asked gently. Raphael closed his eyes. He had never talked about this with anyone, not with therapists, not with friends, not with the few women who had tried to get close to him over the years. "My mother," he finally said, "when I was 8 years old. She died." "Worse," Raphael laughed bitterly. "She chose to leave, decided that being a businessman's wife and a child's mother was too limiting for her artistic dreams. So she packed her things one Saturday morning and went to Paris, said she'd come back but she never did." Louisa felt her heart clench. "And your father?" "My father completely shut down after that. He plunged into work and taught me that the only reliable things in life were business. Numbers don't abandon you, contracts don't betray you, money doesn't decide you're not enough." A particularly strong lightning flash illuminated the entire apartment for a second, followed by thunder that made the windows vibrate. Louisa startled involuntarily, and Raphael, without thinking, extended his arm and pulled her close. For a moment, they stayed like that, his arm around her shoulders, their hearts beating fast, not just because of the storm. Louisa could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of his cologne mixed with the honest sweat of the work they had done. Raphael could feel her hair tickling his chin, the way she fit perfectly against his side. "Sorry," he said, starting to pull away, but Louisa placed her hand on his chest, stopping the movement. "Don't apologize," she said softly. "It's okay." They looked into each other's eyes, and Raphael saw something there that made him completely forget all his rules about keeping distance. There was understanding in those green eyes, and acceptance, and something more he didn't dare to name. "Louisa," he murmured, and there was a question in his voice. Instead of answering with words, she raised her hand and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Raphael closed his eyes at the touch, feeling simultaneously vulnerable and protected. "You don't need to be afraid of me," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise she had no right to make, a commitment that defied logic and prudence, but at that moment, isolated from the world by the storm and connected by an intimacy neither had expected, it seemed the only truth that mattered. Raphael opened his eyes and found her watching him with an intensity that made him completely forget to breathe. Slowly, as if moving through water, he lowered his head until their lips almost touched. "Are you sure?" he asked, his breath mingling with hers. Instead of answering, Louisa closed the distance between them and kissed him. The kiss changed everything. It was soft at first, hesitant, as if both were testing unknown waters. But when Louisa sighed against his lips, and Raphael felt all the tension of the past few days transform into something completely different, the delicacy gave way to an urgency that surprised them both. His hands found her hair, untying the clip and letting the light brown strands fall over her shoulders. She grabbed the collar of his shirt, pulling him closer, as if wanting to eliminate any remaining space between them. When they finally separated, breathless, Raphael rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes. "This shouldn't be happening," he murmured, but his hands remained on her face, contradicting his words. "Why not?" Louisa asked, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Because you work for me, because it's complicated, because you're afraid," she completed gently. Raphael opened his eyes and met hers, emerald green in the golden candlelight. "Yes," he admitted, "I'm afraid." "Of me? Of me? Of what you make me feel? Of what this means?" Louisa raised her hand and caressed his face. "It doesn't have to mean anything beyond what it is right now, in this moment." But even as she spoke those words, both knew it was a lie. This already meant much more than they should allow. The storm continued to rage outside until dawn, and they spent the rest of the night talking. Raphael spoke about his lonely childhood, about how he had learned to build emotional walls to protect himself, about how business success had become his only measure of self-worth. Louisa shared her own struggles, growing up in a working-class family, fighting for recognition in a male-dominated world, the constant need to prove she deserved to be there. In the soft light of dawn, when the storm finally passed, they were lying on the sofa, Louisa nestled against Raphael's chest, her fingers tracing distracted circles on his shirt. They had done nothing more than kiss and talk, but the intimacy they had shared was deeper than any physical experience Raphael had ever had. "The team will be back in a few hours," he said softly, knowing the magical moment was coming to an end. "I know," Louisa replied, but didn't move. "This is going to complicate things." "Everything worthwhile is complicated, Raphael." He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her hair. "What do we do now?" "Now, we finish this project, and we see where this goes." The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster for both of them. During the day, they maintained a professional facade, but the long glances, casual touches, and shared smiles did not go unnoticed by the team. Mark began to make subtle comments, and Raphael found himself having to work harder than ever to stay focused. The nights were different. Raphael had cancelled his return to New York City indefinitely, claiming the need for personal supervision. In truth, he could no longer imagine being away from Louisa. They dined together at the City Hotel's restaurant, walked along the beach at sunset, spent hours talking about everything and nothing. Their romance developed in layers. First came the long conversations, then the stolen kisses when no one was looking. One night, when Raphael accompanied her to her hotel room door, Louisa invited him in. They made love with an intensity that left both speechless, and Raphael spent the entire night simply watching her sleep, marveling at the fact that someone like her could want to be there, with him. "I love you," he said one morning, as they had coffee on her room's balcony. Louisa almost dropped her cup. "What?" "I love you," Raphael repeated, and there was astonishment in his own voice, as if he couldn't believe he had said it. "I know it's crazy, I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, but Louisa silenced him with a kiss. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. It was the first time Raphael had said those words to anyone since he was a child. It was the first time Louisa truly believed them when she heard them. The resort project was nearing completion. The construction was being finished with an efficiency that impressed even Raphael, and Louisa's artistic vision was materializing in every detail. They had created something beautiful together, a space that combined luxury with sustainability, sophistication with authenticity. It was, they knew, a metaphor for their own relationship. "And then?" Louisa asked one afternoon, as they did the final inspection of the pool area. Then what? Raphael asked, but knew exactly what she was referring to. After the project ends, do you go back to New York City? Raphael stopped walking and turned to her. Come with me. To New York City? To New York City, anywhere. Come work with me, Louisa. Not just on one project, but as my partner. We can create a company together, focus on sustainable projects, make a real difference. Louisa's eyes sparkled. Are you serious? I've never been more serious in my life. She threw herself into his arms, and he spun her around, laughing in a way that made the nearby staff smile without understanding why. Is that a yes? Raphael asked when he set her back down. It's a yes to everything, Louisa replied. To New York City, to the partnership, to us. That night they celebrated at the most sophisticated restaurant they could find in the region. Raphael ordered a bottle of French champagne, and they made plans for the future. He spoke about the projects they had in mind, about how her vision could revolutionize the luxury real estate market. She spoke about creating spaces that not only impressed, but had soul, that told stories. To us, Raphael toasted, raising his glass. To us, Louisa repeated. It was the last truly happy night they had for a long time. The next morning, Louisa woke up feeling strange, nauseous, dizzy, with an exaggerated sensitivity to smells. At first she thought it was something she had eaten at dinner, but when the symptoms persisted for the next few days, a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. She bought a pharmacy test and took it secretly in her hotel room bathroom. The 2 pink lines appeared immediately, clear and undeniable. Louisa sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried, not from sadness but from a complex mixture of joy, terror and disbelief. For 3 days she kept the secret. She watched Raphael working, laughing, making plans for their future, and wondered how he would react. They had only known each other for 2 months. They were different people, from different worlds. And now there was a baby. On Wednesday, she scheduled a doctor's appointment in Miami. The gynecologist confirmed the pregnancy and ordered an ultrasound. That's when the second surprise came. Congratulations, the doctor said with a smile. It's triplets. Louisa felt the world spin around her. How is that possible? It happens, the doctor explained gently, especially when there's a family history. Do you have twins or triplets in your family? Louisa shook her head, still in shock. On the ultrasound screen, 3 small dots blinked rapidly, 3 hearts beating, 3 babies. She drove back to Key West in an almost catatonic state. How was she going to tell Raphael? How was she going to explain that in 9 months they would be parents, not of 1, but of 3 babies? How would a man who had been abandoned by his own mother react to the prospect of becoming a father of triplets? That night, Raphael noticed she was strange during dinner, quiet, distracted, picking at her food without eating properly. Is everything okay? He asked, taking her hand across the table. Raphael, Louisa began, and her voice trembled slightly. We need to talk. They went to the restaurant balcony, which overlooked the sea. The lights of the boats flickered in the darkness, and the sound of the waves created a soft soundtrack for what would be the most important conversation of their lives. What is it? Raphael asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. Louisa took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Raphael remained completely motionless, as if the words hadn't reached his brain yet. Pregnant, he repeated finally. Yes. Are you sure? Absolutely. I had tests done today in Miami. Raphael let go of her hand and ran both through his hair. Louisa could see the panic growing in his eyes. Raphael, she said gently, I know it's a surprise, but how did this happen? He asked abruptly. Like any pregnancy happens, Raphael. We weren't as careful as we should have been. You said you were taking... I said I normally took birth control, Louisa corrected him, feeling her irritation grow. But I stopped a few months ago because it was making me sick. I thought you knew. How would I know? Raphael stood up abruptly, starting to pace back and forth. How would I know if you didn't tell me clearly? Louisa felt as if he had slapped her. Are you blaming me? I'm trying to understand how we got into this situation. This situation? Louisa's voice was dangerously low. Is that how you refer to our baby? Raphael stopped pacing and glared at her. Our baby? Louisa, we've known each other for 2 months. We barely know who we are to each other. I know exactly who you are, Louisa replied, standing up as well. The question is whether I really know you. And what does that mean? It means the man I fell in love with wouldn't be reacting this way. The man who told me he loved me wouldn't be making me feel like I had ruined his life. Raphael approached her, and for the first time since they met, Louisa saw something cold and cruel in his eyes. How can I be sure it's mine? The question cut through the air like a blade. Louisa felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked from her lungs. How can you ask me that? She whispered. Because I barely know you, Raphael exploded. Because you appeared in my life. Out of nowhere made me feel things I never felt. And now you're telling me you're pregnant. How can I be sure of anything? Louisa stared at him for a long moment, and Raphael saw the exact moment she decided it was over. Not just the conversation, but everything. You're right, she said with a terrible calm. You don't know me, and clearly I don't know you either. She picked up her purse and headed for the exit. Louisa, wait, Raphael called after her. But his voice didn't carry the desperation it should have. It carried only confusion and fear. No, she turned one last time. You made it very clear what you think about me and about this situation. I won't force you to be part of something you consider a problem. I didn't say... You didn't have to say it, Raphael. It's written all over your face. You're terrified, and when you're scared, you turn into a stranger. Exactly as your father taught you. And with those words, she left, leaving Raphael alone on the balcony with the sound of the waves and the overwhelming weight of having destroyed the only good thing in his life. Louisa left. The next morning, before Raphael woke up, she left only a simple note. Don't worry, you're free. She took her things from the hotel and drove back to Miami, crying the entire trip. Raphael found the note when he went to look for her to apologize. He discovered she had resigned from the project by email during the night, leaving detailed instructions for the team to finish the work without her. He stood in the empty hotel room for a full hour, holding the note and trying to understand what he had done. But when the panic and anger passed, when he could think clearly, it was already too late. Louisa had disappeared from his life as quickly as she had appeared, taking with her not only the love they had built, but also the future he didn't even know he wanted until he had lost it. And in the silence of the empty room, Raphael Montgomery realized that he had become exactly the kind of man he swore never to be. Someone who abandoned those he loved most when things became too difficult to bear. 6 months had passed since Louisa left Key West, Florida, 6 months in, which Raphael plunged into work with an obsession that worried even his closest partners. The resort opened in grand style, received architecture and sustainability awards, and reservations were fully booked until the end of the following year. But Raphael felt no satisfaction in these achievements. Every time he walked through the spaces she had created, he felt an emptiness in his chest that no business success could fill. He had tried to find her a few times in the first few months. He called her company in Miami, but discovered that Louisa had taken leave for personal reasons. Her employees were loyal and refused to give any information about her whereabouts. Raphael even hired a private investigator, but gave up at the last moment. If she didn't want to be found, he had no right to force it. Now, Raphael was in London, attending an international conference on sustainable development. He had accepted the invitation, hoping that a change of scenery would help him think about something else, but even during presentations on innovative projects, his mind wandered to light brown hair and emerald green eyes. It was a chilly Thursday in October when the phone rang. Raphael was in his hotel suite, reviewing emails when he saw an unknown American number on the screen. He almost didn't answer, but something made him change his mind at the last second. Raphael Montgomery, he answered in his usual professional voice. "Mr. Montgomery, this is Miami General Hospital. You are listed as the emergency contact for patient Louisa Albright." The world stopped. Raphael felt the phone slip between his sweaty fingers and had to grip it tightly. What happened?" he managed to ask. "The patient went into premature labor. It's triplets, sir. She's being prepared for an emergency C-section now. Can you come to the hospital?" Raphael didn't even remember hanging up the phone, nor did he remember packing his bags or rushing to the airport like a madman. The only thing he clearly recalled was being on the plane, looking out the window as the lights of London receded, and a single word echoing in his mind: triplets. She was expecting 3 babies. His. For 6 months, while he buried himself in spreadsheets and meetings, she was carrying 3 lives in her womb and going through it completely alone. The flight to New York City lasted 9 eternal hours. Raphael couldn't sleep for a minute. He kept calculating weeks, trying to understand if the babies had a chance to survive, if Louisa was okay, if he would arrive in time. He bought the first available flight from New York City to Miami and spent another 2 hours at JFK Airport, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. When he finally landed in Miami, almost 15 hours had passed since the call. Raphael took the first taxi he found and gave the hospital address. The driver, a man in his 60s, noticed the desperation in his voice. "Is it urgent, sir?" My children are being born," Raphael said, and those were the first words he uttered aloud about the triplets. "Then hold on. We'll get there quickly." The driver stepped on the gas. During the journey through the streets of Miami, Raphael tried to call the hospital several times, but he was always transferred from one department to another without getting concrete information. Anxiety was consuming him from the inside out. What if something had happened to Louisa? What if the babies hadn't survived? What if he arrived too late for everything? Miami General Hospital was an imposing building in the South Beach neighborhood. Raphael paid the taxi without even looking at the fare and ran to the reception. "Louisa Albright," he said breathlessly to the attendant. "She went into labor yesterday, triplets." The woman consulted the system. "And you are?" "Raphael Montgomery. I'm listed as the emergency contact." "One moment." She picked up the phone and spoke softly to someone. "Dr. Carter wants to speak with you. 3rd floor, neonatal ICU." Raphael climbed the stairs 3 steps at a time. On the 3rd floor he was met by a man in a white lab coat, grey hair and a serious expression. "Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Carter, the obstetrician in charge of the case." "How is she? How are the babies?" "Let's talk." The doctor led him to a private room. "Ms. Albright underwent an emergency C-section yesterday at 2:30 p.m. The babies were born at 30 weeks gestation, which is premature but not extreme. They are 3 boys, and all are alive." Raphael felt his legs weaken and held onto the chair. "3 boys?" "Yes. They are in the neonatal ICU, but their vital signs are stable. They will need to stay in the hospital for a few weeks, perhaps months until they gain enough weight. But the prospects are good." "And Louisa?" "The surgery went well. She was exhausted when she was admitted, clearly having been under a lot of stress during the pregnancy. But she's recovering. She woke up a few hours ago and asked for you." She asked for me. Several times. "Mr. Montgomery, may I speak frankly with you?" Raphael nodded. "That young woman went through this pregnancy completely alone. She didn't have a single companion at her appointments. When she went into labor, the only person she could think to call was you. Whatever happened between you, she needs support now." Raphael felt a wave of guilt and shame so intense that he wanted to vomit. "Can I see her?" "She's sleeping at the moment. How about meeting your children first?" The doctor led him down the corridors until they reached the neonatal ICU. Raphael had to wash his hands, put on a gown, and wear a mask before entering. The environment was filled with medical equipment and a constant hum of monitors. "Here," the doctor stopped in front of 3 incubators lined up side by side. Raphael approached and felt the world. Stop once more. They were tiny. So small they looked like fragile porcelain dolls, too delicate to be real, tubes and wires connected to their tiny bodies, monitors showing heartbeats, breathing, temperature. But they were there, alive, breathing. This one is Peter, the doctor pointed to the baby on the left, born at 2.6 lbs. The middle one is Gabriel, 2.4 lbs. And this is Michael, the smallest, at 2.1 lbs. Raphael approached Michael's incubator and placed his hand on the glass. The baby's eyes were closed, but his cheeks moved slightly as if he were dreaming. "Can I touch them?" "Of course, there are side openings in the incubators." Raphael put his hand through the opening and gently touched Michael's arm. The skin was warm and incredibly soft. The baby stirred slightly at the touch, and Raphael felt an emotion so intense that he had to hold onto the edge of the incubator to keep from falling. "My sons," he whispered, and the words came out choked with emotion. He went to the other two incubators, touching Peter and Gabriel with the same reverent care. Peter grasped his finger with surprising strength for something so small, and Gabriel opened his eyes for a moment, revealing greyish-blue irises that reminded him of his own mother's eyes. It was then that Raphael broke down. Everything he had held in for the past 6 months, all the pain, regret, fear, and repressed love, came to the surface all at once. He knelt right there, in the middle of the neonatal ICU, and cried as he hadn't cried since childhood. He cried for Louisa's loneliness, for the months he had lost, for the terror he felt when he thought he would arrive too late. But he cried mainly from overwhelming relief. They were alive. All 4 of them were alive, and he had been given a second chance. A nurse approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Dad. They're strong. They'll be fine." Dad. It was the first time anyone had called him that, and the word sounded like a blessing in his ears. "Does their mother know I'm here?" he asked, wiping his eyes. "I'll let her know you've arrived." She was anxious. Raphael spent another hour in the ICU, watching the babies, talking softly to them, promising he would never abandon them again. When he finally headed to Louisa's room, his heart was beating so hard he was sure she could hear it from the hallway. Louisa was awake, propped up in the hospital bed, looking out the window. She had lost weight, and her skin was pale. But when she turned and saw him at the door, her green eyes still had the same sparkle, he remembered. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," he replied, standing still at the door like a nervous teenager. "You came?" "Of course I came." They looked at each other in silence for a moment, 6 months of hurt and regret hanging between them like an invisible barrier. "I saw the babies," Raphael finally said. "And? They're beautiful, perfect. They look like you." "Gabriel has your eyes," Louisa said softly. Raphael approached the bed, but stopped at a respectful distance. "Louisa, No," she interrupted him. "Not now. I'm too tired for difficult conversations." "May I sit?" he asked, pointing to the chair beside the bed. She nodded, and Raphael sat down, keeping his hands tightly clasped in his lap to resist the temptation to touch her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like someone who spent 9 hours in labor and then was cut in half," she replied with a tired smile. "But alive." "Louisa, I'm so sorry." "Raphael, please let me speak. I know I have no right to show up here after 6 months and expect you to listen, but I need you to know that—" "You have the right," Louisa interrupted him gently. "They're your children too." "They're our children," Raphael corrected, "and I was a cowardly idiot who was afraid and reacted exactly as my father reacted with me." "You reacted like someone who was hurt and didn't know how to deal with something so big," Louisa said. "I understood that later. It didn't excuse what you said, but I understood." "How did you manage to go through this alone?" Raphael asked, and his voice was heavy with guilt. "It wasn't easy, especially when I found out there were 3. But I had my parents, my sister helped me, and I knew I would be capable." "Did you always know they were triplets?" "Since the second doctor's appointment. In fact, I found out the same day I told you about the pregnancy." Raphael closed his eyes, imagining what she must have gone through, discovering she was pregnant with triplets, and on the same day having the baby's father react as if she had ruined his life. "I love you," he said suddenly. I never stopped loving you. Not for a day, not for an hour. Louisa looked at him with tear-filled eyes. Raphael, I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I messed everything up. But I want to be present. I want to be their father. I want to take care of you. If you let me. And if I say no, then I'll respect it. But I'll stay here anyway. I'll rent an apartment in Miami. I'll be available whenever you or the boys need me. I won't leave again, Louisa, never again. Louisa was silent for a long moment, watching his face. She could see that something had changed. There was a vulnerability there that hadn't existed before, a maturity that came from genuine pain and regret. They'll be in the hospital for at least 2 months, she finally said. I know. It's going to be difficult. Sleepless nights, constant fear. A lot of money spent. I know. And I won't pretend I wasn't hurt. It will take time for me to trust you again. I understand. Louisa took a deep breath. But they need their father. And I could never get you out of my head either. Raphael felt a wave of relief so intense that he wanted to cry again. Does that mean? That means you can stay. We can try. Slowly, one day at a time. Raphael nodded vigorously. One day at a time. For the first time in 6 months, Louisa truly smiled. Welcome back, Raphael. And for the first time in 6 months, Raphael felt that maybe, just maybe, he could fix what he had broken and build something even stronger than they had before. The first 2 months were the most challenging of Raphael's life. He rented a small apartment 10 minutes from the hospital and cancelled all professional commitments. His partners were perplexed by the decision, but Raphael no longer cared what others thought. He had more important priorities now. Every day, he arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning and only left when Louisa sent him home to rest. He learned to change tiny diapers, to bathe babies that fit in the palm of his hand, to identify every cry and every need. Michael, the smallest, was the one who worried him most in the first few weeks. He had respiratory complications and needed to stay on assisted ventilation longer, but Raphael spent hours beside the incubator, talking softly to his son, telling stories about the places they would visit together when he grew up. Louisa observed everything with a mixture of surprise and caution. The man who was there, changing diapers and humming out-of-tune lullabies, was completely different from the cold businessman she had met in Key West, Florida. But she had learned the hard way that people could change quickly when faced with pressure, so she guarded her heart, determined not to fall in love again until she was sure this transformation was real and permanent. You don't have to be here every day, she said one morning, when she found him sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. Raphael opened his eyes and looked around, disoriented. What time is it? 6 in the morning. Did you sleep here all night? Michael was restless yesterday. I thought it was better to stay. Raphael, you need to take care of yourself too. How will you help? With the boys if you get sick from exhaustion. But Raphael was already on his feet, adjusting his wrinkled clothes. I'll take a shower and be back. Do you want me to bring anything? That sugar bread you like? Louisa sighed. He was trying so hard, striving almost desperately to prove he had changed, that sometimes she felt sorry for him. Just coffee the way you know I like it, she said gently. The smile that lit up his face was like the sun rising. In the following weeks, Raphael became a constant presence in the neonatal ICU. The hospital. Staff got used to seeing him there, always with a concentrated expression as he learned each new procedure, always with questions for the doctors and nurses. He bought books on prematurity, researched child development online, talked to other parents going through the same situation. Peter was the first to be discharged from the ICU after 5 weeks. Raphael was present when they removed the tubes and transferred him to the common crib. He held his son in his arms for the first time without fear of hurting him, and cried once more, but this time from pure joy. He's perfect, he whispered to Louisa, who watched the moment with tear-filled eyes. They all are, she replied. Gabriel was discharged a week later, and Michael, after overcoming a respiratory infection that had them in a panic for 3 days, Finally joined his brothers in the common room when he was 2 months old. "We can take them home," Dr. Carter announced one December morning. "All three are at an adequate weight and breathing independently." Raphael and Louisa exchanged glances. Home. In the past 2 months they had avoided talking about practical logistics, where the babies would live, how responsibilities would be, divided what Raphael's role in their lives would be. "My parents prepared the children's room," Louisa said hesitantly, "at their house in Gainesville, Florida, temporarily, until I can get organized." "Or," Raphael said, taking a deep breath, "you could stay in the apartment I rented. It's small, but it has 2 bedrooms and it's close to your parents' house." Louisa looked at him in surprise. "Raphael!" "I'd sleep on the sofa," he quickly clarified. "I'm not presuming anything, it's just that it would be easier to take care of them together, and I want to help with the midnight feedings, with the baths, with everything." Louisa considered the proposal. During the 2 months at the hospital, she had watched Raphael transform before her eyes. His dedication to the babies was absolute. His regret for what had happened between them seemed genuine, and most importantly, he had proven that he was capable of putting other people's needs before his own. But living together was a huge step. "For how long?" she asked. "For as long as you want. If after a few weeks you decide it's not working, I'll help you find a place of your own and visit the boys. Go at the times you determine. And your work, your businesses in New York City." "I'm transferring everything here. I decided to open an office in Miami. There are many opportunities for sustainable development in the southeastern United States, and I want my children to grow up knowing that their father works to make the world a better place." Louisa was silent for a moment. "All right," she said finally. "We can try." The apartment Raphael had rented was modest by the standards he was used to, but Louisa was touched by the care he had put into every detail. He had bought 3 identical cribs, but each decorated with a different color to help identify which baby was which. The little room was equipped with everything they could need: a changing table, a humidifier, a baby monitor, a comfortable armchair for nighttime feedings. "You thought of everything," Louisa said, observing the room. "I had 2 months to prepare," Raphael replied, "and a very patient nurse who explained everything I needed to know. The first few weeks at home were a test of endurance. The triplets rarely cried at the same time, which meant there was always at least one awake. Raphael insisted on dividing responsibilities equally, getting up for the 2, 3, and 5 a.m. feedings, changing diapers, calming cries, washing clothes that seemed to magically multiply. Louisa watched everything with growing admiration. On nights when she was particularly exhausted, she would wake up to find Raphael walking around the living room with Michael in his arms, humming softly as the baby finally fell asleep. Or she would see him in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, preparing bottles with the precision of a pharmacist, always making sure the temperature was perfect. "You don't have to do all this," she said one morning after finding him washing the breakfast dishes he had prepared for her. "I want to," Raphael replied without stopping to scrub a bottle. "Not because I feel obligated, but because I want to. They are my children, Louisa. And you are the woman I love. Taking care of you all is not work for me. It's a privilege." It was at that moment that Louisa felt the last barriers around her heart begin to crumble. When the babies were 4 months old, Raphael made an unexpected proposal. "Want to go out with me?" he asked. One Sunday afternoon, while the 3 of them slept simultaneously, a miracle that happened perhaps once a week. "Go out? Where?" "On a date. A real date. My mother can stay with them." "Your mother?" Louisa raised an eyebrow. "You never said she was back in your life." "She came back a few weeks ago. She heard about the boys from a mutual friend and, well, she wants to meet her grandchildren. I'm still processing it all, but she seems genuinely remorseful, and she insisted on taking care of them if I wanted to take you out to dinner." Louisa hesitated. Leaving the babies with someone she didn't even know, even if it was their grandmother, seemed impossible. "We can start small," Raphael noticed her hesitation. "A walk on Crandon Park Beach for an hour. My mother stays here with them, and if anything happens, we're 5 minutes away." An hour later, Louisa found herself walking on Crandon Park Beach next to Raphael, without carrying babies, without worrying about feeding times, without hearing cries. It was strange to feel like herself again, not just a mother, but a woman. "How do you feel?" Raphael asked, noticing her expression. "Strange," she admitted. "Guilty for being here and not with them, but also free. You've been an incredible mother, Louisa. You deserve some moments just for yourself." They walked in silence for a few minutes, the sound of the waves providing a familiar and relaxing soundtrack. "Raphael," Louisa said finally, "I think I'm falling in love with you again." Raphael stopped walking and turned to her. "Again?" "Actually, I think I never stopped being in love. I was just too angry and hurt to admit it. Louisa, these months seeing you with the boys, seeing how you've changed, how you've grown, the man you've become is even better than the one I fell in love with in Key West, Florida." Raphael pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there on the beach, with the Florida wind disheveling her hair and the sun setting on the horizon. It was different from the passionate kisses they had shared at the resort. It was deeper, more mature, laden with promises and hopes for the future. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you so much that sometimes I can't breathe." "I love you too," she replied, "despite everything, because of everything." 2 years later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Raphael woke up to Michael jumping on him in bed. Peter and Gabriel soon joined their brother, and Raphael found himself being attacked by 3 2.5-year-old boys who spoke all at once in still somewhat incomprehensible sentences. "Daddy! Daddy! Beach! Beach!" Peter shouted. "Go! Go!" Gabriel repeated, pointing to the window. Michael, always quieter than his brothers, simply snuggled into his father's chest, content with just the attention. "Good morning to you too," Raphael grumbled with feigned irritation, sitting up in bed with the 3 boys around him. "Where's Mommy?" "Mommy. Coffee," Gabriel explained very seriously. Raphael could hear Louisa's noise in the kitchen, probably preparing the Sunday breakfast that had become a tradition in their new house they had bought in Key Biscayne. It was a simple 3-bedroom house with a large yard and an ocean view. Raphael had sold his luxurious apartments in New York City and invested the money in smaller, more sustainable projects. He discovered he made less money, but slept better at night. "Daddy, can we go to the beach after coffee?" Peter asked, his brown eyes identical to his mother's, shining with hope. "Of course, we will," Raphael replied, ruffling his son's hair. "But first bath, coffee, and brushing teeth." The boys ran off towards the kitchen, and Raphael stayed a few more moments in bed, looking out the window at the sea he could see from his room. It was a different view from the one he had in his New York City penthouse, much less impressive by architect's standards, but it was his, theirs, and that made all the difference. In the kitchen, he found Louisa trying to pour coffee, while Gabriel, hanging on her leg, asked for a cookie. She had let her hair grow, and now wore it in a relaxed bun that Raphael found irresistible. She wore one of his T-shirts and pajama shorts, and even after almost 3 years of living together, he still felt his stomach flutter with love every time he saw her like that, natural and beautiful in the morning light. "Help!" she pleaded, laughing when she saw him. "They're especially energetic today." Raphael took Gabriel off her leg and sat him in the high chair, then did the same with Peter and Michael. "Behave, boys, Mommy is trying to make our coffee." "Thank you," Louisa approached him and kissed him quickly. They woke up at 5:30 talking about the beach. At least they have good taste for weekend plans. After breakfast, which involved more food on the floor than in the children's mouths, the family of 5 headed to the condominium's private beach. Raphael carried the umbrella and the cooler bag, Louisa carried the toys, and the 3 boys ran ahead, shouting with excitement at the sight of the sand and the sea. It was a perfect Miami day, bright sun, gentle breeze, calm sea. Raphael set up the umbrella while Louisa applied sunscreen to the boys, a task that required the patience of a saint. Peter wanted to run into the sea immediately. Gabriel was more interested in building sand castles, and Michael observed everything with his large, serious eyes, deciding which activity caught his attention most. "Daddy, come!" Peter shouted, already running towards the waves. Raphael followed him, holding his son's hand tightly as they entered the sea. The water was perfect, neither too hot nor too cold, and Peter laughed every time a small wave hit his legs. "More, more!" he shouted. From under the umbrella, Louisa watched the scene with a smile she couldn't contain. Gabriel had joined them in the water, and now Raphael tried to manage two excited boys, while Michael remained beside her, building sand mountains with the seriousness of an engineer. "He's just like his father," Louisa murmured, observing Michael. "A born planner." "What did you say?" Raphael shouted from the water, with Peter in his arms and Gabriel clinging to his leg. "Nothing. Just enjoying the show." Later, as the boys napped in the shade after much sun and play, Raphael and Louisa walked along the beach hand in hand. "What are you thinking about?" Louisa asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "How lucky we are," Raphael replied. "How I almost lost all of this due to pure fear." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't, but I could have. And that haunts me sometimes." Louisa stopped walking and turned to him. "Raphael, you can't keep living in the past. You've changed, we've changed. What matters is where we are now." "Where we are now is perfect," he agreed, "and that's why I want to make it official." "Make it official?" Raphael knelt right there in the sand, pulling a small velvet box from his shorts pocket. Louisa brought her hands to her mouth, surprised. "Louisa Albright," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring with an emerald that perfectly matched her eyes. "You taught me what true love is. You gave me 3 wonderful children and a family I didn't even know I wanted. Will you marry me? Will you officially build a life together?" Louisa looked at the ring, at the man kneeling in the sand, at the 3 boys sleeping under the umbrella. It was the family she had always dreamed of having, but never dared to believe was possible. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will." Raphael placed the ring on her finger and stood up to kiss her, spinning her in the air as he had done years ago at the resort. But this time, there were no doubts, no fear, only certainty and love and the promise of a future built together. The wedding happened 6 months later, in a small ceremony on the beach in Key West, Florida, at the same resort Raphael had built and where they met. Few guests, just family and close friends, but it was perfect. The triplets, now 3.5 years old, served as pages, walking on the sand with rings tied with ribbons, scattering rose petals along the way. Raphael wore a light linen suit, Louisa a simple but elegant dress that fluttered in the sea breeze. When they kissed after the vows, Peter shouted, "Daddy kissed Mummy," so loudly that all the guests laughed. 5 years later, on a random Wednesday morning, Raphael woke up to the familiar sound of 3 8-year-old boys getting ready for school. But this time there was an additional sound, a baby's cry. Isabella had been born 3 months ago, an absolute surprise that had left the entire family happily in a panic. After years of careful contraception, they had let their guard down for a few months, and nature decided to bless them with another gift. "Louisa," Raphael murmured, gently nudging his wife, "it's your turn." "It was my turn at 2 in the morning, she grumbled, but was already getting up. "I'll go." Raphael got up and went to the crib in the corner of the room. Isabella was awake and pouting, ready to truly cry at any moment. "Good morning, Princess," he said softly, picking her up. "Daddy's here." The baby stopped crying immediately and looked at him with her large blue eyes. Raphael still marveled at the fact that, at 43, he had become a father for the 4th time, and that each of his children was capable of completely melting his defenses with just one look. In the kitchen, he found Peter helping Gabriel find his gym clothes, while Michael ate breakfast reading a book about dinosaurs. At 8 years old, the boys already had well-defined personalities. Peter was the athletic one, always on the move, always organizing games in the yard. Gabriel was the artist, constantly drawing, creating elaborate stories with his toys. Michael was the intellectual, curious about everything, always asking questions that sent Raphael and Louisa scrambling to the internet for answers. "Good morning, everyone," Raphael said, trying to prepare Isabella's bottle with one hand. "Dad, can Isabella come watch my soccer game on Saturday?" Peter asked. "She's 3 months old, son. She won't understand much of what's happening." But she can cheer for me anyway. Of course she can. Louisa appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work. She had opened her own design studio 5 years earlier, and now employed 12 people, focusing on sustainable projects and affordable housing. All of us can cheer for you. Raphael observed the scene, his 3 older children getting ready for another day of school, his wife kissing each one on the forehead before leaving for work, his baby daughter falling asleep content after her bottle, and felt the same overwhelming sense of gratitude he felt every morning for 5 years. "Dad," Michael approached him after his brothers left for school, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you always know you wanted to have children?" Raphael considered the question. Michael always asked direct questions and expected honest answers. "No," he replied. "In fact, I didn't even know I wanted a family until I met your mother. And even after meeting her, it took me a while to understand that you all were the best thing that ever happened in my life. And now I can't imagine my life without you. You 3 and Isabella and your mother are everything to me." Michael nodded, satisfied with the answer, and returned to his dinosaur book. That night, after all the children were asleep, Raphael and Louisa sat on their house's porch, each with a glass of wine, watching the sea under the full moon. "Do you ever regret it?" Louisa asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Giving up the life of a successful businessman to become a father of 4 children in a smaller city." Raphael laughed. "Smaller city? Louisa, we live in the capital of Florida." "You know what I mean." Raphael became serious for a moment, considering the question. "Do you know the difference between my life before you and my life now?" "Tell me." "Before, I built impressive things that remained empty after they were finished. Now, I build a family that gets fuller with love every day that passes." That was a very beautiful answer, but it didn't answer my question. "All right," Raphael turned to her in his chair. "No, I never regret it. Not for a second. Even on nights when Isabella won't stop crying, even when the boys are impossible, even when you're stressed with work and I don't know how to help. This life, this family, this love, it's everything I always wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it." "What if you could go back in time, to that day in Key West, Florida, when I told you I was pregnant?" "I would get closer to you," Raphael said without hesitation. "I would pull you into my lap, kiss your forehead, and say, 'Thank you for giving me the most beautiful family in the world.'" Louisa smiled and leaned in to kiss him. "I love you, Raphael Montgomery." "I love you too, Louisa Montgomery. Forever." They stayed there on the porch late, talking about plans for the weekend, about work, about the dreams they had for their children. It was a common conversation the kind couples have every night around the world, but for Raphael, who had spent 35 years of his life hiding from love and vulnerability, each such conversation was a miracle. When they finally went inside to bed, Raphael stopped in each of his children's rooms. Peter was sleeping, hugging his soccer ball. Gabriel had drawings scattered on his bed. Michael slept with a book still open on his chest. Isabella was in their crib, breathing softly, her tiny fists closed beside her face. "Thank you," he whispered to no one in particular, "for all of this, for giving me a second chance to do everything right." And when he lay down beside Louisa, who was already sleeping peacefully, Raphael felt the same sensation he had felt every night for 5 years. He was exactly where he should be, with the people he loved, living the life he had always been destined to live. Outside, the sea continued its eternal ebb and flow, as it had done that stormy night in Key West, Florida, when they first kissed. But now, Raphael no longer needed storms to break down his defenses. He had learned that true love was not about protection or control. It was about surrender, vulnerability, and the courage to build something beautiful together with someone who saw you at your worst and chose to stay to see your best. And every night, falling asleep surrounded by the love of his family, Raphael Montgomery knew he had finally found his place in the world.